Yeah. It's interesting when, and I'd say it happens more frequently than I'd anticipated when I actually started to facilitate. But it wasn't uncommon to have a guest go through this sense of dying in ceremony, and on a on an intellectual and logical level, like they knew they were fine, but because everything gets ramped up, ayahuasca is amplifies everything, and so even though they were aware on a logical level, like you know, no, they're not actually dying. This overwhelming sense, this feeling that they were dying, would come up. And it wasn't every single guest, but it was a significant portion out of the groups that I've worked with where this would happen. And in processing them, just kind of letting them share and express and talk through, because it's extremely jarring and scary to go through that process. And what was really fascinating to hear them as they would start to unravel that experience was more to the fact that a part of them, something that they had, that was a cornerstone to their identity or was a way of how they self-identified as who they were, that was being killed off or that was dying, which was really interesting because it took them in a very visceral way, but metaphorically, to that point of facing mortality. And what did that mean for them? How did they choose to work through that? But yeah, there's death is really interesting, and
I think that's going to be the quote for the podcast.
it is. It's the unknown, right? We don't know. And so, yeah, what happens, after, we pass on? There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of theories around, that our spirit, goes back into a collective, or our spirit, just moves on, maybe comes back into another body. But we don't know. And it is one of those beautiful mysteries that I think is, it's fascinating to sit with. But going back to your point around, we live in probably the safest times in human history. It makes you really curious around what is this mental condition that, modern society, humans in modern society have. It's like we manufacture our own ways to scare ourselves, to create conflict, right? And it's because everything is safe now. I don't have to worry about getting food or hunting for food. I don't have to worry about shelter. I don't have to worry about some animal in the middle of the night, coming into my camp and basically killing everybody. It's very safe. It's in some ways sterile. And so what is the byproduct of that sterility is we need to create, our own enemies, our own shadows, our own fears. It's a really, again, going back to kind of my own psychological test of pushing people away. It's like, as a collective society, we're talking about thousands of years of human evolution, and our the oldest part of our brain, this reptilian part of our brain, is so deeply encoded that in you know, when we don't have anything to actually fear, we'll actually create something. You know, and that's conflict or that's fear, you know. I mean, the amount of horror movies that are out there, like, why do we have horror movies? Because it's that adrenaline rush. It, you know, brings us back into that state, you know, of fear for our lives. You know, what's around that corner? You know, is Jason, the other Jason, you know, gonna wake up from the dead and, you know, come after the rest of the camp? So, yeah, that's a really interesting point that you bring up. It's because we live in such safe times, you know, given the history of, you know, humanity. You know, death no longer is in our face constantly. So, how do we respond to that? How do we react to that?